Good morning. Thank you for joining us all today for this special higher level high notes cybersecurity threats for 2026. Click, breach, repeat. Today we are joined by Symphona Technology, where we are going to be going over, of course, those ever-changing threats for 2026 whenever it comes to our technology. I'm Summer Vanderbilt, and I'm happy to have all of you here today. This is going to be recorded. I'm getting ahead of your questions ahead of time. It will be recorded, and we will be sending this out later this week. So you will get this. And we want you to be as interactive as possible, asking questions as we have the experts with us here today. I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to Matt Jones now with Symphona, and hopefully we can just dive right in.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Summer, and thanks to Aaron and the rest of the higher level team for the opportunity to present today. We're real excited about it. Just a quick overview on the firm and who the three of us are and sort of what we do. Symphona, we're a professional services firm out of Georgia. We have 5 offices across the state, approximately 200 team members. We have a number of service lines, the traditional CPA service lines, tax advisory, audit, consulting, and then we've got a couple of non-traditional service lines. We've got a CAS service line. We have an HR consulting and outsourcing service line. And then what the three of us are part of is the technology service line. So within the tech service line, we've got about 30 team members across 3 locations. Our customers range from sole proprietors and small businesses to large enterprises with, up to 1,000 employees. Some of our industry focuses include legal, financial institutions, professional services, but our customers range the entire spectrum of industries and sizes. And then our service line, we also perform all of the internal systems administration and maintenance for the other service lines within the firm. So my name is Matt Jones. I've been with the firm for just shy of 25 years. I went to the University of Georgia, have a master's of accountancy there. I will not disclose what year. I'll just say it was somewhere between the Herschel Walker Championships and the Kirby Smart Championships. And if there's any football fans, you can sort of try to back into the general 3 decades that I may or may not have graduated. I started with the firm about 25 years ago, and I started as a bank auditor, as a matter of fact, and then moved full-time to tech about 5 years ago. So I am a recovering auditor. The shock treatments have been working well. I'm responding to them, and so the jitters and the withdrawals have been going slowly away. And with me are 2 of my team members that I've been working with for a number of years. Grant Pickett, he is in our Savannah office. Grant graduated with a bachelor's degree in IT from Georgia Southern, and he's been with us for about 10 years. He started in systems administration on the CPA side and then has gradually moved over the years working with my team, the SecOps team. So now he does vulnerability assessment and penetration testing for a lot of our financial institution and banking customers. He handles most of our social engineering testing and education campaigns. And then he also does a good bit of work with systems automation. So building automation frameworks for the firm to use. And then we also have Warner Smith with us. He has been with the firm for about 3 years. He's originally from Dublin, Georgia, and is now working in the Smyrna technology office. He's got a bachelor's degree in cybersecurity from Mercer University, and is currently working on wrapping up a master's in cybersecurity from Georgia Tech. And so he helped me build out our security operations team and pretty much handled the building and design of our SIM and all of the tools relating to that. He's involved greatly in our incident response efforts with customers when bad things do happen. And then he also, in addition to Grant, works with audit and consulting in the financial institutions industry, and then also our systems automations as well. So hopefully y'all feel like you're in good hands. Just a quick overview. As far as the background, this presentation was designed to be interactive. This is actually the first time we've ever done it in a webinar format. So we're going to leave the chat open. If anybody has any questions, I don't think anybody has the ability to unmute their mic, but feel free at any point in time to throw a question in the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on it and pose those questions to the other guys timely. So we will have a Q&A session at the end, but don't feel like you have to wait until the end if you've got a question that is pertinent to what we're covering at the time. We'll try to answer those questions quickly. So we're going to do just a high level overview of security best practices, why it matters. We're going to go through some common attack scenarios that we see regularly. These are all based on real incident response cases that we've worked over the past few years. We're going to give you some real world examples of some phishing emails and actually walk through what that looks like from the email through the click and then through the attack. So you can actually, see what those attack flows look like, and then at the end we'll go through some mitigation strategies on what you can do to reduce your exposure to these risks and hopefully not get bit like has happened with some of the scenarios that we're going to be outlining. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant, and he's gonna get us started.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here and joining us this morning. So I'm just going to jump right into it and ask the question, why does cybersecurity matter? And the gist of it is cyber threats are increasing in volume, sophistication, and impact on a daily basis, and we can't get away from it. And at this point, we kind of just have to live with it, but we need to know what to do so we don't get hit. And we've noticed that attacks are rising in volume and cost every day. They primarily target small to medium businesses due to their limited resources in their security defenses. Breaches can lead to a mix of financial loss, downtime, fines, legal issues, and even reputational damage that no one wants. And it's always a question of not if, but when. Right? So we always want to assume that we can get breached or we will be breached. So with that in mind, how do we prepare accordingly? And hopefully by the end of this presentation, we'll give you some insight in terms of what you need to do. And then, a single click really is all it takes. Even though we're in a certain hierarchy of structure, C-suite, lower, tiered people in the company, everybody primarily is at the same level of a potential intro vector for an attacker. Everybody receives emails, everybody's at the same risk. And we've seen too, through a couple reportings, IBM and even the University of Maryland, that about 46% of breaches do target these small businesses. So jumping over to what information security is, we kind of need to understand what IT security is first before we can jump into cybersecurity. IT security is all about protecting systems, networks, and data from threats. And the main foundational risk assessment framework that is used in this sense is what's called CIA Triad. And this is made up of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, confidentiality primarily is all about limiting access to data, making sure that only people who need the access have that access to that specific data. You can kind of think of this in line with least privilege that we'll mention multiple times throughout this presentation. Integrity is ensuring your data accuracy. We want to ensure that the data is always accurate and not outdated. And then availability is ensuring your uptime, making sure that our users can access what they need when they need it at all times. Now, cybersecurity is a subset of IT security, where IT security focuses on these systems, networks, and data. Cybersecurity focuses more so on the digital threat defense. How do we make sure that we are remaining defensive from all of these potential threats out there? Now, both of these systems are business critical, and they're not just technical concerns, as we'll see later. Now, cyber defense, you've got multiple ways to go about it, but the most effective is with overlapping layers, and this is termed defense in depth. You can kind of think of this like an onion, where an onion has multiple layers protecting the center. We're doing the same thing, just with our IT security. The majority, there's tons of layers here. We've highlighted the top 5. You've got human, endpoint, network, application, and data. And starting with human, you can think of this as security awareness training, what we're doing here this morning. This is a very good version and example of what the human layer needs for security. Phishing simulations is another one. As Matt mentioned, that's what I primarily focus on here at the firm. This is sending out and crafting social engineering phishing emails with a training background, making sure that users know exactly what the red flags are and making sure that everybody has good email hygiene. Moving down to endpoint, you have EDRs, or endpoint detection and response, antivirus, and device policies. Now, EDRs are softwares that continuously monitor end user devices like laptops, computers, phones, devices, or servers, and they go through and they detect and respond to malicious cyber threats like ransomware and malware. Examples of these are SentinelOne or CrowdStrike. Jumping over to network, this is where your firewalls, IDS, IPS, and network segmentation lands. An IDS, or an intrusion detection system, monitors network traffic and then flags any potential threats that it may see, whereas a prevention system sits within the traffic path and actually blocks or mitigates threats in real time. Network segmentation is just a good method to use in general, and that is basically breaking your giant network down into subnets or smaller segments to ensure that you have your DR over here, servers are over here, laptops are here, Wi-Fi or mobile is over here, so not everything is just one giant pool. Application, we want to ensure that we are using applications that contain secure coding. And we are doing our patches and we are running tests against those patches before we push to production. So if you're using a Microsoft application, we want to make sure when an update comes out, we typically want to update or run that update. If you're on Reddit or some of these other open forums and people throw out, hey, I just made this application, it's all vibe coded via AI, you probably don't want to use that because you don't know what any kind of security background they may have or have built into this thing, right? That doesn't necessarily fall under secure coding like something from Microsoft would. And then with data, this is where your encryption, backups, and access control lie. So at this point, everyone's kind of up to speed in terms of what encryption is, why encryption and encrypting your data is important. With backups, we want to ensure that we have backups of all of our production applications, just in case something were to happen, we can bring it right back up. But we also want to ensure with backups that they are also off-site. So if anything were to happen at your office, you don't want your backups to also be there, you want them to be somewhere else. And then access control ties back into the least privilege and the confidentiality, making sure that people only have access to what they actually need access to. Right, we don't want a lower intern having access to HR payroll type stuff and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what that handles. Now, with all of these layers in place, we are doing the best that we can, but no single layer is enough, right? We want to combine all of these layers to ensure that we have resiliency against any potential incoming attacks. Now, the human factor is the biggest one, of course. They say that over 80% of all breaches involve some form of human error or manipulation. This can be found in IBM's security report from 2024 and even 2025. They reiterate the same thing. And examples of these human error or manipulation tactics primarily fall down to social engineering. And examples of these can be fake invoices or impersonation scams over the phone, or even credential harvesting that we'll jump into in a second, which is using leaked passwords and all that kind of stuff that can be found out on the dark web and whatnot. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that training is key and continuous training is essential. So we want to ensure that we're continuously training our folks on a yearly basis, not just a one and done. I marked, or, I checked off the box, I did my training. We want to ensure that people are being trained constantly to ensure that they are always up to speed on what is out there and what to expect. And to do this, one of the good things or abilities, examples that you can use would be to use these phishing simulations to test and teach in real time. Spin up a social engineering campaign, send it out to your employees, and see if they can read through all the red flags of an email and see if they have good email hygiene and email etiquette to ensure that they can, spot and pick out the bad ones or the suspicious ones from the good ones. And we, as people say in multiple different ways, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And unfortunately, the human factor, us, we are typically the weakest link. Now, to go over some common attack types that are out there that we've specifically seen, we have phishing and vishing. So these are your fake emails or voice solicitation, your fake phone calls that are designed to trick users into revealing credentials or even installing malware on their machine, inviting these attackers in through a remote session. So they then have access to their computer. That's primarily all done through phishing or vishing. Now, business email compromises, or BCEs as we call them, typically are all about tricking employees into making unauthorized fund transfers. And we've got a couple good examples of those. Those are primarily our main incidents that we typically see since we've been doing this for our clients. Insider threats is another one. So any disgruntled employee or contractor potentially abusing or making careless mistakes within the company on your system, on your network, is another one. And then credential attacks. These range from credential stuffing to brute forcing, and this is primarily using leaked or weak passwords to gain unauthorized access to systems. Ransomware, everybody's heard the term. This encrypts business data and typically demands payment in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Now, each of these attacks have a real-world business impact, and that ranges from your loss of revenue, trust, and even your uptime. So no one wants that, right? Now, to go over some of the real-world examples that we've seen, I'm going to pass this over to Warner, and he's going to step you through a selection of these different attack types and share what we've seen and how we've kind of combat them a little bit. Warner?
Awesome. Thanks, Grant. So like Grant said, we're going to step through a couple of these common attack types and things that we've seen over the last couple of years. One thing I will say is these scenarios are a little bit, they're probably 6 months old at this point, but we see these every single day. Like I think just 2 weeks ago, we had a pretty big phishing incident. And this technique has kind of evolved over the last couple of years, but typically in what we have seen, this is the normal attack flow. So I'll reiterate, vishing is a social engineering technique that occurs over the phone. People will typically try to call in and get users to take actions that they normally wouldn't based on a trust relationship. So in this case, we had a client who came to us after their controller, I believe it was, received a phone call from someone claiming to be from their bank. They very convincing, provided a lot of information that they would not have known otherwise. I'm not entirely sure how they got the internal information, but we know for a fact it wasn't Ameris Bank. They asked the user for her username and password, and provided the username and password and the corresponding MFA code that was sent to her phone afterwards. So this, of course, gave the attackers administrative access to their platform, the wire transfer platform, and the cash management account. And they ended up wiring out over $1 million. I think it was 1.2 million in total in about 30 minutes. So they were able to do this by changing the confirmation phone numbers for the accounts. So just to reiterate, there's no email involved here. It was entirely over the phone. Of course, they did have some information that corresponded to the user's account. Again, not entirely sure how they got it, but obviously this resulted in massive financial loss and significant reputational damage. I believe the client was able to get in contact with the GBI and claw back a majority of the funds here. But still, at any time you see any amount of money go to an unauthorized bank account overseas, that is a major, major red flag. Again, I'll kind of take a step back here and give another tip. Anyone claiming to be from your bank will usually never ask for your username and password, and they will especially not ask for an MFA code. So again, additional major red flags here. Matt, I saw you unmute your mic. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, so I will say, Warner mentioned the GBI or the FBI being able to claw back funds. Historically, the rule of thumb is if you catch a fraudulent wire transfer within 24 to 48 hours, they could historically get those funds back. With the change in the way the payment systems work, that time period has been greatly reduced. In this particular scenario, they were actually on the phone with their bank watching the funds transfers go through. They figured out that the bad guy was in there, and they were still not able to claw back all of the funds. I think it was 2 wire transfers that went out, and they were only able to claw back one of them. And then I'll also interject that it's not just phone calls anymore. We've started seeing a rash of voice initiated calls, but coming in through Microsoft Teams. So we've got one where they will start spamming a user's inbox with just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails in foreign languages. It's all a bunch of garbage. And then the user will get a Teams call from somebody pretending to be IT support, and they say, "Hey, we've noticed that you're getting spam bombed. We're here to help." And they end up giving them a remote access session into their computer. So that's another voice initiated one that we're starting to see a lot more of.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the evolution of this technique. It's not, and all of these techniques in general are constantly changing. Attackers will always find a way. All they have to do is find one weak link. Again, the weak link breaks the whole chain. So again, to kind of go back even one more time, we've seen an additional scenario in which entire firms will begin receiving phone calls from people pretending to be IT help desk. And of course, they'll ask for remote access to the machine. So typically, again, just another quick tip, if you have an IT service provider or use IT in-house, most of the time they'll have approved remote access methods, and they will not ask you to install additional software on your computer. So that's another thing to look out for, and something that we've actually even been targeted with ourselves internally. So again, having very strong social engineering training, especially for vishing and phishing, is absolutely key to recognizing these kinds of attacks. So we can move on to the next scenario. This is a business email compromise, and I'll reiterate what a business email compromise is one more time. It goes past what's called a corporate account takeover, which is when somebody will actually hack into a corporate email account and begin reading and potentially exfiltrating emails out of the user's account. It becomes a business email compromise when there is a monetary loss involved. So typically that is going to be an unauthorized wire transfer, ACH transfer, sent to an unauthorized bank account. We'll go through this scenario on both sides. So from the scammer's perspective, the user account that was hacked and the one who had actually the funds stolen from them. So in this case, the user in a financial department, again, financial department, high value target. But the user in the financial department receives a SharePoint document sharing link from a trusted contact. The user clicks on the link, enters the username and password, and this initiates a proxy connection between the user and Microsoft. And in essence, the attackers are able to steal the MFA token. That's the most important piece of the puzzle, because this MFA token is used for single sign-on. It proves to Microsoft that you have already given your username and password once before, say in the last 48 hours, and they will allow you to authenticate. Right, so they steal this MFA token and are able to authenticate as you and access the inbox. So that's exactly what happens here. They get into the inbox, they read every single email until they find something that's related to a wire transfer. If we get in fast enough, we can typically see the search history, and they look for things like wire transfer, ACH. They'll even type in $signs to see if they can find monetary amounts. But those are the kind of things that they're looking for. They turn around and create an inbox rule to send every email related to this suspicious activity to, say, RSS feeds, your folder that you wouldn't normally check, so that they can extend the period that they would be in the inbox. So once they've found a wire transfer that's ongoing, they inject themselves into the conversation and typically try to steer the target away from the real party here. So they'll provide the modified bank details. And then once the modified bank details are sent and the actual funds are stolen, they will turn around and blast out an additional phishing message to your entire contact list. So we typically see a couple different tools that they use for this, but most of the time what they'll do is they'll scrape email signatures for email addresses and build that into a big contact list and send out 2,000 or 3,000 phishing emails from a legitimate account. So just to reiterate here, I mean, attackers are using legitimate Microsoft email accounts, or Google, whatever it may be. And they're able to do this through the theft of that MFA token. So everything seems legitimate. You could get a phishing email from a known trusted contact. Just takes a little bit of an extra second. We'll actually look at an example of this, but it just takes a little bit of an extra second to pick up on some key indicators of phishing that you could internalize and be able to pick things apart. So we can move on to the scammed side. So in this case, this is kind of like on the opposite side of the original scammer side. So this is, I believe, the same scenario. So a user in a financial department receives an email from a third-party contractor asking to change their payment details before the next remittance is processed, as wire transfer or ACH. The user obviously corresponds with this malicious party and changes the banking information to the information provided by the user. So the payment gets sent. The contractor states that they were never paid. Probably, I believe it was 2.5 months later. And we went in and did a pretty extensive investigation here. We're able to confirm that the third party had been compromised and the bank details that were changed were actually fraudulent, which resulted in a monetary loss of about $200,000 and a pretty significant civil lawsuit for additional penalties. So primary attack vector here, obviously, is the phishing email that was sent to the third party. And that's how the attackers were able to get into this scenario. Some of the impacts here could be, unauthorized access to corporate accounts and information, especially in emails. We know people typically send either sensitive information or personal information or non-public information over email back and forth, and those can carry potential legal implications. So unauthorized access to that kind of information is quite dangerous. Compromise of confidential information, obviously, monetary loss, reputational damage again, and the potential for litigation resulting from the loss of the funds. We'll move on to more credential-based.
I'm gonna jump in real quick there, Warren. Another key takeaway here is that the email that was used to actually start the chain is coming from a known user. So it's coming from a good a good email address. They can be very, very, very hard to detect. And it's even relating to an ongoing transaction. So, there are some tells that you can see in the emails, and we'll show those later on in terms of the way the emails are worded, or the way like a document link is presented, that could be an indicator that you're not really talking to the correct person in the email chain, but they are coming from a known trusted third party. So these aren't just coming in from some random Gmail account. They are coming in from a known third party. One interesting one that I saw several years ago, it was a conversation between a compromised, I believe it was a doctor, and their CPA. And through reading the emails in the doctor's inbox account, they figured out that the doctor and the CPA had a personal relationship. They were friends outside of the business, and that they also communicated via text message. And so the attacker goes into the doctor's contacts list and finds the contact for the CPA and adds an alternate mobile device phone number. So then he is able to text the doctor, and the text message comes in and gets merged in with legitimate text messages that were received from the CPA, because the email platform sees both of those as part of the same contact and merges them together. So they actually took the scam out of the email and moved it over to text messages. And so email was, at this point, was completely removed. And I believe the scenario was, it was an IRS tax payment, and they said, hey, I'm going to take this out of email so I don't transmit any sensitive information by email. I'm going to send you the wire info via text. They get the IRS wire instructions via text message embedded in a legitimate text message chain that, included previous comments and, pictures of the CPA's vacation home and that kind of thing. So they can get very, very, very crafty with these, and they can turn what they're doing in their attack vector on a dime once they get in there. So they change constantly, and they're very, very, very adaptable to the scenario at hand.
Yeah, very sophisticated. Very sophisticated. But we'll move on. We can go on to some of the password-based attacks, and these are going to be more focused on the network itself, actually compromising network assets like servers, information stored on those servers, workstations, and the like. So first, we're going to look at a brute force attack. This is primarily, again, going to be targeted at the network. Let me see here. Notes got backwards, excuse me. But essentially, what a brute force attack is, in essence, is attackers will try to they'll try every single set of credentials until something works. They'll typically target a specific site or a network access point, like a VPN. That is the biggest target that we see for these brute force attacks. So in this scenario, the attackers were able to gain access to the network by brute forcing an administrative account's weak password. So this was an old administrative account that was forgotten about. And in doing so, they gained administrative access to the internal network over the VPN. There was no MFA involved on the VPN whatsoever. So gaining access was trivial. They got in, were able to move to the on-site backup server, use an exploit to get credentials to the backup server, and delete every on-site backup. So after establishing a foothold across the entire network, they deployed ransomware and encrypted every single asset on the network and exfiltrated a substantial amount of data. I think in this case, it was about 180 gigabytes worth of sensitive information related to the party's clients. So, of course, after they exfiltrated the data, they were able to extort not successfully, but they were able to extort the party for additional funds and payment for release of that information. So this is a pretty typical ransomware attack scenario. All started with a very weak username and password combination with no MFA. So you'll see, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but we talk about MFA everywhere all the time on every single asset you can possibly put it on. It is, I believe the statistic is it will stop about 90% of all attacks. against at least Office 365. But when you look at VPN, there is no threat really of the same token theft attack vector that we saw previously. So just having that one control turned on will provide a significant amount of protection against things like this. So additionally, we can talk about the backup server as well here. And our defense in depth, building the security onion, we'll say. They had their backup server on the same network using domain credentials for the administrator account. So the attackers were able to actually get access that way. So having offsite backups and backups copied elsewhere that are immutable, that cannot be touched by anyone, it cannot be changed, is an absolute necessity as well. So, of course, some of the impacts here, we can discuss those, but they are pretty typical of all ransomware attacks. Unauthorized access to corporate systems, accounts, information, personal information and non-public information, reputational damage, significant monetary loss. I mean, we typically see legal fees with lawyers themselves going up to $300,000 in a lot of these cases. So we can get in a little bit later. I think Matt will talk about some cybersecurity insurance strategies and sort of the importance of that. But being able to be covered when you have these incidents is also a necessity. So we can look at an additional attack scenario here with credential stuffing. This is far more targeted than brute force because it uses previously compromised sets of credentials. So these will be found in security breaches. So whenever you see, like, if you use a password manager, the password manager might tell you that the password has been seen in a previous security breach. This is the main threat here, is credential stuffing. So typically, in this case, the way I'll describe it is they'll try every site for a given username, not every username for a given site, like they would in a brute force attack. So we can move on to this scenario here. And this one's a little bit different. So these guys had slightly better security. They had MFA pop-ups on their workstations for interactive logons. So when you sit down, hands-on keyboard in front of the monitor, it would pop up with a Duo prompt asking for MFA, which is great in theory. But they thought that they would be covered. So they did not have MFA on the VPN. You can see a bit of a theme here. So attackers try previously compromised sets of credentials against this unsecured VPN with no MFA. And they were able to get in, of course, followed a very similar playbook, tried to move laterally as quickly as possible to the most sensitive assets. Again, this is going to be backup servers, file servers, and things like domain controllers, things that are actually responsible for authentication. So they found a credential set that worked and, of course, moved in. The account that was actually compromised was a local administrator on every single workstation in this network. So using network-based authentication rather than interactive, so like may have used remote desktop protocol, RDP, to get into a workstation, that would prompt for a Duo confirmation. But over the network, that defense measure was circumvented. So again, we can talk about defense in depth here, looking at MFA on your VPN and MFA on the workstations. So again, adding additional layers around critical assets. But because they were able to authenticate over the network, they could compromise every single workstation and every single server without being prompted for a Duo prompt. So again, very, very similar to the previous scenario. Similar impacts, unauthorized access to corporate systems information, non-public information, monetary loss, reputational damage. Clients could leave because they feel that their information is not safe in your hands in the corporate network. Yeah, those are, again, the major impacts of having a ransomware attack. And Matt, you unmuted your mic.
Yeah, and in both of these scenarios, the attack was against a VPN. And the really scary thing about VPNs, so if they do compromise those credentials, they're essentially sitting outside the network, but they're plugged into the network. So they can take as many shots at internal assets as they want to. And so in one of these cases, the company they had 24/7 antivirus monitoring. And it happened at like 2 o'clock in the morning on Labor Day weekend. The monitoring service caught it, and they started disabling network connectivity from assets as they were being targeted. But because these guys were connected to the VPN, when they got shut off on one, they just moved to another one. And so they basically had persistent access. Whereas if they had just compromised one workstation with a virus, if that one workstation gets shut off, they lose their foothold. But in this case, they're essentially plugged into your network and they're using a device you don't have any control over, and they can take as many shots as they want to. So we generally do not recommend traditional VPNs anymore. We're recommending using Zero Trust network access as an alternative method. So if you do use VPNs, particularly SSL VPNs, definitely talk to your IT people or your service provider about some ZTNA options. They're much more secure and they have a much smaller footprint for these types of attacks.
Yeah, the primary benefit there is just the granularity that you can get over who can access what times, and where they can access it from. So you can even get as small as say, I would be able to access a single internal corporate website from a specific machine with the client installed. So it ramps up the security a good deal. And just gives you that extra level of control over the devices accessing your corporate network. So you can move on. Now we'll go through a real world phishing email. This was actually a phishing email that was sent to a partner of ours. And again, it followed a very, very similar workflow to that of the business email compromise scenario that we discussed earlier. So Grant, if you could move on. So you can see here, Richard here is inviting the partner to bid on a potential project that he has ongoing. So you can see the phishing email is quite generic. It says, "Hello, we're pleased to inform you that your firm has been selected to submit a proposal for the upcoming project," and then shares a JotForm link here to a nondescript PDF. So some of the things that we can pick up on here pretty clearly are the use of very generic language in this email. Typically, you're being invited to bid on a substantial project. It might be a little bit more personalized. It's not going to be a blast out to a significant number of recipients. And the big tell here is that there are no recipients here in the to field. The to is actually the same email address as the from. And usually we'll see that when attackers are BCCing an enormous list of recipients, they will send out the same email to 2,000 individuals. They don't want to have 2,000 people in the to field because that would be a pretty big tell. So again, we can go through these very generic language here. Pleased to inform you that your firm has been selected to submit a proposal. And then there is an aspect of urgency here as well. They give a 2-day deadline to respond to the project proposal. Additional indicators down here, kindly note, that's typical language that we see in phishing emails across nearly all of the phishing emails that we see. Kind of a couple funny stories about that. But again, kindly note is a little bit suspicious to me on its face. So we'll walk through. We actually had this forwarded to us on the security team from one of the partners at the firm, and we're able to do a little bit of analysis on what the payload looked like. So we'll walk through this and act as though we clicked on the link here to respond to the proposal. So the first landing page is actually in this JotForm here. And it sends us directly to a click here to view the document. This is a secondary landing page that the attackers are typically going to use to try to bypass automated analysis engines. So places like Microsoft, some of you may be familiar with Microsoft SafeLinks. That will actually visit the page and perform some static analysis and determine if the page is phishing or not. But typically, these tools only go one layer deep. So recursive URLs kind of trick these engines into thinking, okay, this is perfectly fine. Looks like a legitimate Jotform landing page. It's okay, send it through. And I believe that's how this email actually got through the spam filter. So we'll go ahead and click here to view the document. We'll move on. And this takes us to a secondary Cloudflare landing page. This is just additional layers to prevent those analysis engines from being able to detect the phishing emails. So we'll go and click and verify that we're human. There is some language here that is indicative of phishing. First, this domain is quite odd, pmzsovq.es. It's very, very strange, nondescript. Randomized domain name is quite odd in this context. And the language here, tracking validation around request, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense given the context, especially for Cloudflare. So we'll click and verify that we're human here. And this will take us to yet another landing page. So in here, again, they're just building the layers to prevent the engines and people like us from poking around. So in here, we actually had to provide the email of the partner who was the target, and they have these landing pages tied to specific targets. So we had to provide the email address of the partner until, let's see, it would finally redirect us to the final landing page, which is a fake Microsoft login page. You can see here, again, this domain name, pmzsovq.es, is, again, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense given the context. That is absolutely not Microsoft's domain. So this would be an immediate disqualifier for me personally. But in essence, what the attackers are trying to have you do here is input your username and password. They will send your username and password on your behalf to Microsoft, receive the connection back from Microsoft, and actually read the cookie that's provided back to you for authentication. And that is the piece that will allow them to authenticate as you to your email address. So you can see here, there are a couple of indicators. I already pointed out the domain name here. And the primary one here is enter password to access your office mail. That's just very, very odd. So we can move on.
So some mitigation strategies that we can go through and ensure that we have in place to make sure that we are doing what we need to be doing is ensuring that we are strengthening user security awareness and training. So we're really hitting on those phishing simulations, and security awareness programs to ensure that our people are up to speed with where things are these days with attack vectors and some certain red flags in email, and ensuring that they have good email hygiene. We also want to encourage verification through out-of-band communication. And what this means is going back from one of some of these previous examples that Warner had stepped through, is if you receive an email that you believe might be a bit funky or suspicious or kind of strange in terms of why am I receiving this, be it from a random user or someone I might trust and know, out-of-band confirmation would be, okay, I got this email, it looks kind of weird. Let me pull up my phone and give them a phone call and verify that they actually sent me this email. We don't want to reply back to that email and ask, because we could be theoretically talking to the attacker who will just reply back and say, yeah, it's me, it's real, click on it. So out-of-band confirmation is a really big thing to be aware of, especially when you're dealing with potential unsolicited messages that you may receive. And granted, this can even be SMS text messages. If you get a random text from someone, try to find another out-of-band communication form that you can try to verify that they had actually sent you something. You can look at implementing strong identity and access management. Now, this means, enable multi-factor authentication across all systems, what Warner mentioned earlier, MFA on everything, everywhere, all at once, use complex, unique passwords and promote password hygiene. We're seeing these days the recommendation to move away from the 8-character complex passwords that use all your symbols and letters and numbers and things, and instead push everybody to use 14, 15 plus characters And instead of your complex, but use passphrases instead. A long phrase, be it your favorite song lyric. You can say, my password is my cat is purple, and have spaces in between each word or something. You know, something a bit more personalized to you, something you would recall, but something that kind of adds additional length to the password is the newest recommendation that we are seeing come down across the board. We want to apply the principle of least privilege and fine-grained access control. We touched on this previously, but making sure that users only have access to things that they need access to. We don't want the low intern having access to payroll. We don't want, you know, I don't know, a supervisor having access to HR background checks or blah, 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 whatever else. You know, they need to stay in their lane, and we need to ensure that we have that set across the board. We can enhance email and network defenses. You know, deploy secure email gateways to filter out malicious content. These are your spam filters. Office 365 has one. We utilize Mimecast here at the firm. Bitdefender are a couple others that you can use as well. Monitor and block suspicious activity with endpoint detection and response solutions like SentinelOne and CrowdStrike. We mentioned these earlier. Maintain resiliency and recovery capabilities. You know, regularly update and patch your systems and your software, and maintain secure and offsite backups are some examples. Now, if we have been how can you catch and minimize breaches? You know, again, MFA everything, everywhere, all the time. We're definitely hitting that one hard. And consistent user training also. We need to ensure that users are constantly being trained about what is changing, what to look out for, and to ensure that they are at their best ability able to be the frontline defense, especially when it comes to email and communication. We want to use strong EDRs or XDRs. So that's your SentinelOne, your CrowdStrikes. We want constant monitoring. Monitoring can be used with the SOC or a security operations center that will go through and constantly monitor, you know, all the alerts and network traffic and all that kind of stuff for you. You can look at implementing a SIEM or using one. In the introduction, Matt mentioned Warner Assisted building one that we use here internally. And that's your security information and event management solution that basically collects and aggregates and analyzes all of your security data and alerts and things. And then implement least privilege. Again, this kind of comes down with your Active Directory access control, ZTNA that Matt mentioned earlier, your zero trust network access. These are your primary big heavy targets that you want to focus on to make sure that you are minimizing your potential chance for a breach. Another large thing that we like to hit and home in on is building a security culture within your company. So cybersecurity must be embedded in the company culture, and it is not just IT's responsibility. We are typically on the front line in terms of building the defenses and things, but it needs to come from the top down in terms of this is important. We are doing training, we are doing this, we are doing that to protect us as a whole. We need to reinforce that every employee has a role to play in protecting the organization. You know, promote reporting of suspicious activity, right? Be diligent. If you see something, say something. If someone speaks up and says, I think this might be a bit suspicious, you know, they shouldn't get penalized for bringing that to your attention, right? We want to ensure that we are using positive reinforcement. Recognize employees who report your phishing attempts or follow specific security protocols. I mean, that's what the training is for these people to go through and actually act on it and ensure that they are doing their best bet of protecting not only themselves, but the company as a whole. And we want to align policies, training, and leadership messaging to reinforce that this is shared accountability and not just one person's responsibility or one department's responsibility. It is everybody's shared accountability to ensure that we are doing what we need to do to ensure that we are safe. Now, what to do if you unfortunately have been breached? The first thing to ensure that you do have prior is a response plan. How do you And how does your company, plan on acting out in case something like this does happen? After you've been breached, your first step should be containment, right? Limit the damage and stop the spread. You should notify any internal and external stakeholders per your policy. This could include legal and compliance if needed. You want to document everything. So any actions taking place, the timeline of the breach, any impacted systems that you may have come across, and then analyze what had happened and adjust your defenses to make sure that this isn't a recurrence.
I saw a hand go up. I believe it was Jeff. Jeff, if you've got a question, if you wouldn't mind dropping it in the chat, we'll see if we can address that for you. I don't think we can transfer the voice over to you to ask the question. But just to kind of expound while we're waiting on that, cybersecurity insurance is critical. And your cyber insurance company is going to have the tools and the team and the resources to help with the containment and the incident response. They should be the second, if not the first people that you call. The first people you need to call needs to be your MSP or your IT team, and then quickly followed by your cyber insurance to get the ball rolling on that, because they'll bring in, top tier incident response teams to help contain. They can negotiate, in the case of ransomware, they can negotiate with the bad guys and facilitate that. I've actually dealt with an incident response for a company here recently that is in the medical industry. They did not have any sort of cybersecurity insurance. So when everything went sideways, they had to come out of pocket for all of the mitigation. All of their systems were taken down. It took them 2 to 3 weeks to get everything back up and cleaned. They paid out of pocket for all of that. And then now, because they're in the medical industry, a number of law firms took out Facebook ads targeting their local area. And they have, I believe, 6 class action lawsuits ongoing right now from various law firms across the country that have absolutely no footprint in the state that they're located in. And so not only are they having to deal with the recovery, but they're also having to deal with the attorney's fees in fighting these class action lawsuits. So that can get extremely expensive. So if there's one key takeaway that you take from this, if you don't have cyber insurance, that needs to be a top priority that you look at.
Yeah, I believe according to IBM last year, the price tag on a data breach is about $4.4 million on average. That's globally. It's actually higher in the United States by a few $100,000. But these things get very, very expensive very quickly. So having a plan in place and someone that you can lean on to guide you through and have you covered when you experience these breaches is critical.
And I think we're pushing towards the end of time. We don't necessarily have a hard stop, but we would like to take just a moment to open it up to any questions. If there's anything that anybody would like us to address, feel free to toss it in the chat, and we'll see what we can do.
All right, really great information. Thank you guys for all of this and all of your knowledge for the industry that is, of course, becoming data breaches. So really, really great stuff. I'm looking to see if there's anything coming into the chat or into the Q&A. I don't see anything yet, which I think that means you guys did a great job covering all of the information. And you maybe anticipated some of the questions that people may have. So as always, like I said in the beginning, this is recorded and we will be sending it out to everyone either later today or later this week. And there's also information with the continuing education credit that you will receive to submit, because this is worth 1 credit hour. So once again, thank you guys for your time. This presentation was wonderful, and I hope we all feel a little bit safer online now knowing some of these tips. Thank you, Matt, for putting your information in here in the chat so that everyone can see it, reach out directly. And I'm assuming that the QR code as well will allow them to connect with you, correct?
It should, yes.
All right, that wraps up this time's higher level high notes, and we will see you all again next month. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.